Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at some really interesting English words and phrases.
Oh, cool.
The kind that, you might hear and understand, basically, but there's like a whole hidden world of meaning underneath.
Yeah, for sure.
So we've got some great sources that you shared with us that
Mhm.
really dive into Nemesis, Under the Weather, Read Between the Lines,
Okay.
and Take Off.
Yeah.
So
Those are good ones.
I think you're interested in expanding your vocabulary, how English really works.
Right.
So we're going to unpack these words, their origins, and kind of what they tell us about communication today.
I am excited to dig into these.
Yeah.
These are great examples of how language evolves and how even simple words can carry a lot of cultural baggage.
Yeah, for sure. Let's start with nemesis.
Okay.
It's a word that just has this weight to it, this sense of inevitable conflict. I always think of those classic superhero rivalries, like Batman and the Joker.
Right.
You know?
You're hitting on something important there, that sense of an ongoing struggle.
Right.
A nemesis isn't just any opponent. It's one that seems almost fated, someone who challenges you again and again,
Right.
forcing you to confront your weaknesses.
That's interesting that you bring up fate because the word itself comes from Greek mythology, right?
Exactly. Nemesis was the goddess of retribution.
Oh, wow.
And her job was to bring down those who were too arrogant or prideful.
Okay.
That's where we get that sense of inevitability, that idea that a nemesis is a force you can't escape.
So it's not just about having an enemy, it's about having an enemy that, like, reveals something about you,
Yes.
about your flaws.
Absolutely. A true nemesis exposes your vulnerabilities.
Okay.
And often the conflict isn't just about winning, but about learning and growing as a result of the challenge.
Wow. So how do we use nemesis today? Is it always this dramatic, epic struggle?
Not necessarily. It can be used in a more everyday sense, too.
Okay.
Like that calculus exam has been my nemesis all semester or something like that. It's still a challenge, an obstacle,
Yeah,
but maybe not on a life or death scale.
I love that. So everyone can relate to having a nemesis,
Right.
whether it's a tough subject, a rival at work,
Yeah,
or that one sock that always goes missing in the laundry.
exactly. But I think that connection to the mythological origin still lingers.
Yeah.
We use nemesis when we want to emphasize the significance of that challenge, that
Yeah.
it's not just a minor annoyance.
Okay, so we've got this image of a nemesis as a powerful opponent, a force that pushes us to our limits. Let's shift gears now to something a little more, shall we say, low-key.
Okay.
Let's talk about under the weather.
Right.
I use this phrase all the time, but I've never really stopped to think about where it comes from.
You're not alone. It's one of those idioms that we just kind of accept without questioning.
Right.
But its origin is actually pretty fascinating.
Okay.
It comes from the world of sailing,
Oh, really?
back when ships were powered by wind, and breathing the elements was a much bigger deal.
So are we talking about actual weather here?
Literally. When sailors were feeling seasick or unwell,
Oh.
they would go below deck to escape the harsh conditions.
Huh.
They were literally going under the weather.
So they were seeking shelter from the storm, just like we might want to do when we're feeling sick.
Exactly. And it's amazing how that image has persisted.
Right.
Even though most of us aren't sailing the high seas these days,
Yeah.
we still use this phrase to describe feeling ill.
But it's not just a synonym for sick, is it? There's a certain nuance to under the weather.
You're right. Under the weather implies a temporary mild illness.
Yeah.
It's not serious enough to warrant a doctor's visit, but it's enough to make you want to take a break and rest.
It's almost like a way of downplaying your illness, making it seem less dramatic.
Exactly. It's a softer way of saying you're not feeling your best.
So when I tell my boss I'm under the weather, it's like I'm hinting that I need a mental health day,
Right.
not that I'm at death's door.
Precisely. It's a subtle way of communicating without having to go into too much detail.
So it's not just what you say, it's how you say it.
Right.
These little idioms pack a lot of information into a few words.
And that's what makes language so fascinating. It's not just about conveying information, it's about conveying it in a way that's appropriate for the situation
Right.
and the relationship between the speakers.
And that's a perfect segue to our next phrase, read between the lines.
Okay.
This one always feels so mysterious, like a secret code you need to crack.
It does, doesn't it? And in a way, it is a bit like a code.
Uh-huh.
Reading between the lines means understanding the unspoken, the implied meanings
Right.
that aren't explicitly stated.
So it's about picking up on those subtle cues,
Yeah.
these things that people are hinting at but not saying directly.
Exactly. And it can be a really valuable skill,
Yeah.
especially in social situations or when trying to understand someone's intentions.
I feel like this is a skill we use all the time, especially in the age of like text messages and emails,
Right.
where tone can be so hard to convey.
Yeah.
You're always trying to figure out what are they really trying to say here?
You hit the nail on the head. And that's where reading between the lines comes in.
Right.
It's about being attuned to the subtext, to the nuances of communication that go beyond the literal words.
So how do you get better at reading between the lines? Are there any like tips or tricks?
Well, one key is to pay attention to context.
Okay.
What's the situation? Who are you talking to? What's their relationship to you?
Mm-hmm.
All of these factors can influence the hidden meaning behind their words.
It's like being a detective, piecing together clues to understand the bigger picture.
Exactly. And just like a good detective, you need to be observant and pay attention to all the details.
Okay.
Tone of voice, body language, even the choice of words can all provide valuable insights.
So it's not just about what people say, it's about how they say it and the context in which they say it.
Absolutely. Reading between the lines
Mm-hmm.
requires us to be active listeners, to engage with the message on multiple levels.
Right.
It's a skill that takes practice but can be incredibly rewarding.
And speaking of things that can be both rewarding and a little challenging,
Okay.
let's talk about our last phrase for this part of our deep dive, take off.
Right.
It seems straightforward, but when you start to think about it, this simple phrase can mean so many different things.
It's a great example of how English can be both incredibly versatile and incredibly confusing,
Right.
especially for people learning the language.
Yeah.
2 little words, so many possibilities.
So let's unpack those possibilities.
Okay.
Where do we even begin with take off?
Whoa. Well, I think the most obvious meaning is the literal one, to remove something, like take off your hat or take off your shoes.
Right, that's the one we probably learned first. It's physical, straightforward, but then things get more interesting when you think about the other meanings of take off.
Exactly. And I think a good place to start is with that image of an airplane taking off.
Okay, I can see where you're going with this.
No.
It's about sudden upward movement, a departure from a fixed point.
Precisely.
Mm-hmm.
And that idea of sudden upward movement can be applied metaphorically to all sorts of situations.
Like when we say someone's career took off.
Exactly. It suggests a rapid ascent, a sudden burst of success. And that imagery is so powerful. It's not just that their career is doing well.
Right.
It's that it's soaring. It's gaining momentum quickly.
So takeoff can be about physical removal, sudden upward movement, and then there's that other meaning we often hear, to leave quickly, to depart suddenly.
Right. Think about phrases like, I'm going to take off now, or they took off without saying goodbye.
Right.
There's a sense of urgency, of abruptness in those instances.
And it's interesting how the meaning can shift so subtly depending on the context.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's neutral, sometimes it suggests excitement,
Right.
and sometimes it implies something negative, like a hasty retreat.
That's the beauty and the challenge of phrasal verbs.
Yeah.
They often rely on context and subtle cues to convey their full meaning. It's like they have this hidden layer of information that you need to unlock.
It's fascinating how a single phrase can be so versatile. And it makes me wonder, do any other languages have anything quite like phrasal verbs in English?
That's a great question. While other languages certainly have verbs that combine with prepositions or adverbs to create different meanings,
Okay.
English phrasal verbs are known for their sheer number and complexity. They're a real hallmark of the language.
And a source of endless frustration for anyone trying to learn English as a second language.
I can imagine. It's not just about memorizing vocabulary. It's
Right.
about understanding the subtle ways in which these verbs change their meaning depending on the preposition or adverb they're paired with.
It's like a secret code that you need to crack.
Exactly. And once you start to understand the logic behind phrasal verbs,
Yeah.
it opens up a whole new level of fluency and understanding.
Okay, we've talked about decoding those hidden meanings in phrases like read between the lines. And we've seen how take off can take on multiple meanings. But what about those times when we're struggling to find the right words at all?
You mean that dreaded tip of the tongue phenomenon?
Exactly. You know, the word exists, you can almost taste it,
Yeah.
but you just can't quite spit it out.
It's one of the most frustrating experiences, isn't it?
Oh, it is.
It's like having a word on the edge of your consciousness, but it just slips away every time you try to grasp it.
And it always seems to happen with the most important words, the ones you really need in that moment.
Right. Like during a job interview or a presentation,
Oh, yeah.
you're trying to sound eloquent and intelligent,
Uh-huh.
and suddenly your brain decides to play hide and seek with your vocabulary.
I've even tried describing the word I'm looking for,
Yeah,
but it's like trying to explain a color to someone who's never seen it.
I know exactly what you mean. You start throwing out synonyms and examples,
Right.
hoping something will jog your memory, but it just makes the frustration worse.
And then, just when you've given up hope, the word magically pops into your head.
Oh.
It's like a wave of relief washes over you.
And sometimes that word comes to you hours later when
Right.
you're in the shower or doing something completely unrelated. Our brains are strange and wonderful things.
They really are. It's almost like our subconscious minds are working on the problem in the background.
Yeah.
And then they just hand us the solution when they're ready.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even when we feel stuck,
Yeah.
our brains are constantly working behind the scenes, making connections and retrieving information.
So the next time you have a word on the tip of your tongue, maybe don't stress about it too much. Just trust that your brain will eventually come through.
Exactly. It's a humbling reminder that we're not always in complete control of our own minds.
Speaking of things we don't fully control, let's talk about the evolution of language. We've been discussing how words can have multiple meanings and how those meanings can change over time, but what about words that didn't even exist a few years ago?
That's a great point. Language is constantly evolving, adapting to new technologies, new ideas, and new ways of thinking. It's a living, breathing entity that reflects the changing world around us.
And we're seeing that happen faster than ever before,
Yeah.
thanks to the internet and social media.
Absolutely. New words and phrases are popping up all the time,
Right.
and they spread like wildfire through online communities.
It's amazing to think that words like selfie, hashtag, and meme were barely on our radar a decade ago.
Right.
Now they're part of our everyday vocabulary.
And it's not just new words that are emerging. Existing words are taking on new meanings and connotations as well.
Can you give us an example?
Think about the word viral. It used to be primarily associated with disease, but now it's commonly used to describe anything that spreads rapidly online.
That's a great example. It's fascinating how a word can take on a whole new life in the digital age.
And it's not just technology that drives language change. Social movements, political events,
Okay.
and even fashion trends can influence how we use and interpret words.
So language is constantly reflecting and shaping our culture and vice versa. It's this incredible feedback loop.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Language is never static. It's always in flux.
Right.
And that's what makes it so fascinating to study.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
From the origins of ancient words to the emergence of internet slang.
Yeah.
But I think there's one more fascinating aspect of language we need to talk about.
Okay.
The power of metaphor.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Metaphors are essential to how we understand and experience the world.
We've already touched on this a bit with phrases like under the weather and take off.
Right.
But I want to dig a little deeper.
I'm all for it. Metaphors are one of my favorite topics. They're like these little windows into how our minds work.
So for anyone who needs a refresher, what exactly is a metaphor?
At its core, a metaphor is a figure of speech that compares two seemingly unrelated things.
Okay.
It's a way of saying something is something else without using like or as.
So instead of saying he's as strong as an ox, we might say he's a real ox.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And by making that comparison, we're transferring some of the qualities of an ox strength, power, resilience, onto the person we're describing.
It's like we're creating a shortcut in our brains, using a familiar image to understand something new or complex.
That's a great way to put it. Metaphors help us make sense of abstract concepts,
Right.
emotional experiences, and even scientific phenomena.
Can you give us an example of how a metaphor might be used to explain something complex?
Sure. Think about the phrase, time is money.
Okay.
Time, in its purest sense, is an abstract concept.
Right.
But by comparing it to money,
Uh-huh.
something tangible and valuable,
Yeah.
we just suddenly have a framework for understanding how we use and value time.
It's like we're giving shape to something that's otherwise invisible.
Exactly. Metaphors help us grasp the intangible and make it relatable, and they're incredibly powerful tools for communication.
They can also be really persuasive, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Politicians and advertisers use metaphors all the time
All the time.
to sway our opinions and emotions.
Metaphors can evoke strong feelings and create vivid imagery in our minds. They tap into our shared experiences and cultural understandings.
So the next time you hear a politician talking about draining the swamp
Right.
or an advertiser promising to unleash your inner beauty, think about the metaphors they're using and the effect they're trying to create.
It's all about being aware of the power of language and how it's being used to shape our perceptions.
It's like we're peeling back the layers of meaning, revealing the hidden messages embedded in our everyday conversation.
Exactly. And the more we understand about how language works,
Yeah.
the more effectively we can use it to communicate our own ideas and navigate the complex world around us.
This has been a truly fascinating exploration of the English language, from its ancient roots to its ever-evolving present. We've talked about the power of idioms, the versatility of phrasal verbs, the mysteries of the tip of the tongue phenomenon, the evolution of words, and the magic of metaphors.
It's amazing how much we can learn about ourselves and the world around us just by paying attention to the words we use.
And I have a feeling this is just the beginning of our linguistic journey. There are so many more words and phrases out there waiting to be explored.
Absolutely. It's like we've opened a door to a whole new world of linguistic discovery, and there are endless paths to explore from here.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's one key takeaway you hope our listener will walk away with today?
I think the biggest takeaway is that language is so much more than just a set of rules and definitions. It's a living, breathing, constantly evolving system that reflects who we are, how we think, and how we connect with each other.
It's almost like a mirror reflecting our collective consciousness.
Exactly. And by understanding how language works, we gain a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
It's like we've been given a new set of lenses through which to view the world, and suddenly everything looks a little bit different, a little bit more nuanced.
And that's the beauty of language exploration. It's a journey that never really ends. There's always something new to discover, some hidden meaning to uncover.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to take off for today. But before we do, I want to thank you, our amazing listener, for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of English words and phrases.
It's been a pleasure sharing these linguistic gems with you.
Remember, the more you explore the intricacies of language, the richer your communication will become. So stay curious, keep those dictionaries handy, and never stop asking questions about the words we use every day.
And who knows, maybe your next question will be the inspiration for our next deep dive.